A human being spends much of life searching for peace in places where peace was never meant to be found. Some search for it in wealth, believing that enough money will finally quiet the worries inside their hearts. Others search for it in status, recognition, and the approval of people. Some spend years chasing dreams, convinced that happiness waits just beyond the next achievement. Yet time passes, goals are reached, and still something feels missing. The heart remains restless because it was created for something greater than the world can offer. This is the reality that Ibn Qayyim draws our attention to at the beginning of this journey. The greatest need of a human being is not food, wealth, comfort, or success. The greatest need of every soul is Allah. A person may survive for days without food and water, but the heart cannot survive without its creator. The heart was designed to know Him, remember Him, rely upon Him, and love Him above everything else. One of the greatest mistakes a person can make is believing that goodness comes only from his own efforts. A man works hard and begins to believe that success belongs entirely to him. Another gains knowledge and believes that his intelligence alone brought him there. Slowly, without realizing it, people begin trusting themselves more than the one who gave them their abilities in the first place. Yet every breath we take, every opportunity we receive, and every good deed we perform exists only because Allah allowed it to exist. The person who understands this truth changes completely. He no longer looks at prayer as his achievement. He no longer sees acts of worship as trophies to admire. Instead, he sees them as gifts from Allah. If he wakes up for prayer, he thanks Allah for inviting him to stand before him. If he avoids a sin, he thanks Allah for protecting him from falling into it. If he performs a good deed, he thanks Allah for placing that goodness in his path. Gratitude slowly replaces pride, and humility begins to replace self-admiration. This understanding protects the heart from one of its greatest dangers, believing that it can stand on its own. Human beings naturally love feeling strong, capable, and independent. Yet the truth is exactly the opposite. Every step we take depends upon Allah. Every heartbeat continues because He allows it to continue. Every moment of guidance remains in our hearts because He keeps it there. We are far more dependent upon our Creator than we often realize. Ibn Qayyim reminds us that Allah did not place two hearts inside a single human being. The heart has room for one ultimate love, one ultimate loyalty, and one ultimate attachment. Whatever occupies the center of the heart begins shaping the entire life of the person. If the world sits upon that throne, the person becomes a servant of the world. If status sits there, he becomes a servant of people's opinions. If wealth sits there, fear of losing wealth begins controlling his life. But when Allah takes His rightful place at the center of the heart, everything else falls into balance. For this reason, the believer constantly asks himself an important question. What truly occupies my heart? What causes my greatest fear? What brings my greatest joy? What do I think about when my mind is free? The answers to these questions often reveal where the heart has placed its deepest attachment. The world has a way of quietly entering the heart without asking permission. A person begins worrying more about losing money than losing closeness to Allah. He begins caring more about people's opinions than the pleasure of his Lord. Slowly, the center of gravity shifts away from the Creator toward the creation. This is why the heart requires constant attention and constant correction. But when love for Allah grows, something beautiful begins to happen. The heart slowly becomes lighter. The need for approval becomes weaker. The fear of losing worldly things becomes smaller. The servant begins living for something greater than temporary success and temporary praise. He discovers a kind of peace that the world cannot give and cannot take away. Perhaps this is where true happiness begins. Not when a person gains control over life, but when he realizes that life was never his to control. Not when he becomes independent, but when he recognizes how deeply he depends upon his Lord. The moment a servant understands his need for Allah is often the moment he begins finding the peace he had been searching for all along. A person who truly understands his need for Allah begins seeing life differently. He no longer turns to his Lord only during moments of hardship. He understands that his dependence upon Allah did not begin with his problems, and it will not end with their solutions. He needs Allah when he is weak, and he needs Him when he feels strong. He needs Allah during failure, and he needs Him during success. The servant who realizes this truth carries a sense of humility that remains with him in every season of life. Many people believe that success belongs to intelligence, talent, or hard work alone. They look at what they have achieved and quietly convince themselves that they built everything with their own hands. Yet if they stop for a moment and look deeper, they realize that every ability they possess was given to them. The mind they think with, the health they depend on, the opportunities they receive, and even the people who help them along the way are gifts they never created for themselves. This realization changes the heart. A person no longer sees blessings as proof of his greatness, but as signs of Allah's generosity. Success no longer feeds arrogance, because the servant understands where success came from. He knows that if Allah had willed otherwise, the doors that opened could have remained closed forever. Gratitude begins replacing pride, and thankfulness begins replacing self-admiration. This is why the names of Allah carry such deep meaning for the believer. Allah is the first, the one who existed before every cause and every opportunity. Before the doors opened, He was there. Before the path appeared, He was there. Before the servant even thought about asking, Allah already knew what he needed. Nothing begins without Him. And Allah is the last. When people leave, He remains. When wealth disappears, He remains. When strength fades, He remains. Human beings often place their trust in things that change, weaken, or disappear. But the believer slowly learns to place his trust in the one who never changes and never disappears. The servant who understands this no longer becomes a prisoner of circumstances. He works hard and uses every opportunity available to him, but his heart does not become attached to the means themselves.
He understands that the means are only tools, while the one who controls the results is Allah alone. This understanding creates a kind of peace that many people spend their entire lives searching for. It also changes the way a person looks at disappointment. When doors close, he does not immediately fall into despair. When plans fail, he does not believe that everything is lost. He knows that the one who closed one door can open another that he never imagined. His hope no longer depends upon circumstances, but upon his Lord. Ibn Qayyim reminds us that one of the greatest dangers of the soul is taking ownership of the good that Allah places in our lives. A person prays and begins to admire his own worship. He gains knowledge and begins admiring his own intelligence. He performs good deeds and quietly begins believing that he deserves praise for them. Yet every act of goodness was only possible because Allah made it possible. If a person wakes up for prayer, Allah invited him to that prayer. If he stays away from sin, Allah protected him from falling into it. If he helps another person, Allah gave him the opportunity, the ability, and the desire to help. The believer who understands this becomes softer, more grateful, and more humble. This understanding also changes the way we look at others. Instead of looking down on people who struggle, we remember how easily we could have been in their place. Instead of becoming proud of our own strengths, we remember how quickly those strengths could disappear. Mercy begins replacing arrogance, and compassion begins replacing judgment. Perhaps this is one of the greatest forms of freedom a human being can experience. The servant no longer carries the exhausting burden of believing that everything depends upon him. He still works, plans, and strives, but deep in his heart, he knows that outcomes belong to Allah. And sometimes the peace we spend years searching for begins the moment we finally understand that truth.
Many people spend their lives searching for someone strong enough to carry their fears, understand their pain, and protect them from what lies ahead. They look for security in money, relationships, careers, or social status. Yet sooner or later they discover that every human support has limits. People change. Wealth disappears. Strength fades. The things we once believed would protect us eventually reveal their weakness. This is why the believer is invited to know his Lord not only as the creator of the universe, but also as the one who stands above everything and yet remains closer than anyone else could ever be. Ibn Qayyim speaks about two beautiful names of Allah that transform the way a believer sees the world: the Most High and the One who is near. At first glance, they may seem opposite to one another. How can the one who is above all creation also be near to every heart? Yet this is exactly what makes the relationship between the servant and Allah so extraordinary. Allah is above every king, every ruler, every power, and every authority that has ever existed. Nothing stands above him, and nothing escapes his control. The stars move by his command. The oceans remain within their boundaries because he allows them to remain there. Every victory, every defeat, every opening, and every delay happens under his wisdom and permission. The believer who understands this no longer feels intimidated by the changing powers of this world, because he knows that above them all stands Allah. At the same time, Allah is not distant from his servants. He is not a Lord who creates and then abandons his creation. He knows every fear hidden inside the heart before the lips ever speak about it. He knows the tears that people hide from others. He knows the prayers that never leave the chest and never become words. Before a servant raises his hands in supplication, Allah already knows what weighs upon his heart. This understanding changes the way a person experiences loneliness. There are moments in life when people fail to understand us. There are burdens that words cannot fully explain, and wounds that remain invisible to everyone around us. In those moments, the believer remembers that there is one who sees what nobody else sees and understands what nobody else understands. Perhaps this is why the prophets turned to Allah before turning anywhere else. Before the sea opened, Moses trusted Allah. Before the fire became cool, Abraham trusted Allah. Before help became visible, their hearts were already attached to the one who controls help itself. Their peace did not come from seeing solutions. Their peace came from knowing the one who creates solutions. A person who truly understands this begins living differently. He still appreciates people and values relationships, but he no longer places the weight of his heart on human shoulders. He no longer expects people to carry burdens they were never created to carry. His deepest trust belongs to Allah, and because of that, his heart becomes stronger. This does not remove pain from life, but it changes how pain is carried. The servant still grieves, still struggles, and still experiences loss. But despair no longer controls him, because he knows he is not walking through life alone. The one who created his heart walks him through every hardship that heart will ever face. Ibn Qayyim reminds us that knowing Allah is not simply about learning information. It is about learning how to live. The more a servant knows his Lord, the less frightening the world becomes. Fear begins shrinking because trust begins growing. Anxiety begins weakening because certainty begins taking its place. Perhaps one of the greatest gifts faith gives a person is this simple but powerful realization. No matter where you are, no matter what you face, and no matter how alone you feel, you are never abandoned. The Lord who rules the heavens is also the Lord who hears the quietest whisper of your heart. And sometimes that truth alone is enough to carry a person through even the darkest nights. The closer a person grows to Allah, the more his understanding of love begins to change. The world teaches us to love things that make us feel important, comfortable, or admired. It teaches us to build our lives around possessions, achievements, and the opinions of others. Yet these kinds of love often leave the heart exhausted because they ask for everything while giving very little in return. They demand our attention, our energy, and our peace, but they can disappear in a single moment. Ibn Qayyim reminds us that every heart was created to love, but not every love deserves to sit at the center of the heart. The heart has room for many things, but it has only one throne. Whatever sits upon that throne begins shaping the entire life of the person. If money sits there, the fear of losing money controls the heart. If people's approval sits there, the opinions of others begin controlling decisions. If status sits there, every success feels temporary, and every failure feels unbearable. But when Allah occupies that place, everything else finds its proper size. The believer still loves family, friends, work, and the blessings of life, but none of them become greater than the one who gave them. Love no longer becomes a chain that controls the heart, but a gift that points the heart back toward its creator. This is one of the most beautiful realities that Ibn Qayyim teaches. Loving Allah does not take away the good things of life. It protects us from becoming their servants. A person who loves Allah above everything else enjoys blessings without becoming imprisoned by them. He can appreciate success without worshipping success. He can enjoy wealth without becoming owned by wealth. He can love people deeply without making them the source of his ultimate security. The believer constantly asks himself difficult but necessary questions. What hurts me the most when I lose it? What excites me more than anything else? What do I fear losing more than I fear losing closeness to Allah? These questions often reveal what truly occupies the center of the heart. The danger is that the world rarely enters the heart suddenly. It enters quietly and patiently. A person begins caring a little more about recognition, a little more about approval, a little more about appearance, until one day he realizes that the things meant to stay in his hands have slowly moved into his heart. This is why the heart requires attention, just as the body does. Left alone, it drifts. Left unguarded, it becomes attached to temporary things and begins expecting eternal satisfaction from things that were never created to provide it. But the servant who constantly returns his heart to Allah protects himself from becoming lost in that process. When love for Allah grows stronger, something remarkable begins to happen. Fear begins losing its power. The need for approval becomes smaller. The pressure to prove oneself to the world starts fading away. The believer begins living for something larger than reputation, wealth, or status. He discovers a kind of freedom that many people search for but never find. Perhaps this is why some of the most peaceful people in history owned very little, while some of the most anxious people owned everything they could possibly want. Peace does not come from possessing more. Peace comes from knowing where the heart belongs. Ibn Qayyim teaches that the heart was never created to carry the weight of the world. It was created to carry the love of its creator. Everything else becomes lighter when that love is placed where it belongs. Problems do not disappear, responsibilities do not vanish, and hardships do not suddenly end. But the heart becomes stronger because it is finally resting where it was always meant to rest. And perhaps that is one of the greatest secrets of happiness in this world and the next. Not loving less, but loving the right thing the most. The more a person learns to trust Allah, the more his understanding of worship begins to change. Prayer is no longer something he performs simply because he has to. It becomes a moment of return, a moment of peace, and a meeting with the one who understands him better than he understands himself. Supplication is no longer reserved for moments of crisis. It becomes part of everyday life, as natural as breathing and as necessary as water to a thirsty soul. Ibn Qayyim reminds us that true faith is not only seen in outward actions, but also in the condition of the heart behind those actions. Two people may stand side by side in prayer, perform the same movements, and recite the same words, yet the distance between their hearts can be greater than the distance between the earth and the sky. One stands before Allah with complete trust, gratitude, and love, while the other stands with a distracted heart and a wandering mind. The journey of faith is not simply about doing more. It is about becoming more aware of the one for whom we do everything. A person may spend years adding actions to his life, while forgetting to deepen his relationship with the one who gave those actions meaning in the first place. This is why the heart remains at the center of every spiritual journey. Ibn Qayyim speaks about 4 beautiful names of Allah that can completely change the way a believer sees life. The first, the last, the Most High, and the One who is near. When a person understands these names, life begins to make more sense. Allah is the first. Before your fears existed, He existed. Before your problems arrived, He existed. Before you made your plans, He already knew them. Nothing enters your life without first passing through His wisdom and His knowledge. Allah is the last. When people leave, He remains. When opportunities disappear, He remains. When strength fades and the world changes around you, He remains exactly as He has always been. The believer finds peace in knowing that while everything else changes, Allah never changes. Allah is above everything that frightens you. Every problem, every enemy, every difficulty, and every uncertainty exists beneath His authority. Nothing is bigger than Him, and nothing is outside His control. At the same time, He is closer to you than anyone else could ever be. He hears the prayers you never say out loud. He sees the tears that nobody else notices. He knows the fears you hide behind your smile. When these truths settle into the heart, they begin changing the way a person faces life. Success becomes easier to carry because it no longer belongs entirely to him. Failure becomes easier to survive because it no longer defines him. Praise becomes less intoxicating, and criticism becomes less destructive. The heart slowly finds balance because it is no longer being pulled in every direction by the world. One of the greatest traps of the human soul is believing that every good thing comes from ourselves. We work hard and begin believing that success belongs only to our efforts. We make good decisions and begin admiring our own wisdom. We perform acts of worship and quietly begin admiring our own devotion. Yet the believer remembers that every good thing in his life first began as a gift from Allah. If you pray, it is because Allah opened that door for you. If you avoid a sin, it is because Allah protected you from it. If you help another person, it is because Allah gave you the ability, the opportunity, and the desire to help. Remembering this truth protects the heart from pride and keeps gratitude alive. Perhaps this is why the strongest believers are often the most humble people. The more they grow, the more they realize how much they still need Allah. The more they learn, the more they recognize how little they truly know. Their strength does not come from believing in themselves more. It comes from trusting in Allah more. And maybe this is one of the greatest freedoms a person can experience. To stop carrying the impossible burden of believing that everything depends upon you. To work hard, to strive sincerely, and then to place the outcome in the hands of the one who has always been in control. That is where peace begins, and perhaps that is where true surrender begins as well. Many people spend their lives trying to appear strong. They hide their fears, bury their weaknesses, and convince themselves that needing help is a sign of failure. The world praises independence and teaches people to rely on themselves above all else. Yet the truth is that human beings were never created to carry life alone. We were created to depend on Allah. And the moment we forget that, the heart begins carrying weights it was never meant to carry. Ibn Qayyim explains that people differ greatly in how deeply they understand this reality. Some only remember Allah when life becomes difficult. When illness comes, they pray. When fear arrives, they seek His help. When every door closes, they finally turn toward the one whose door never closes. There is goodness in this, but it is only the beginning of the journey. Others reach a deeper understanding. They realize that they need Allah not only in hardship, but also in comfort. They need Him when they are healthy just as much as when they are sick. They need Him during success just as much as during failure. They understand that guidance itself is a gift. Faith itself is a gift. Even the ability to remain patient, grateful, and sincere comes from Allah alone. This understanding changes the way a person sees himself. Success no longer becomes a reason for pride because he knows where success came from. He no longer looks at his achievements as proof of his greatness, but as evidence of Allah's generosity. Every blessing becomes a reminder rather than a trophy. One of the greatest dangers for the human heart is quietly beginning to admire itself. A person prays regularly and starts believing that he reached that point through his own strength. Another gains knowledge and begins admiring his own intelligence. Someone else avoids major sins and slowly begins looking down on those who struggle. Without realizing it, gratitude disappears and pride takes its place. But the servant who truly understands his dependence on Allah sees things differently. If he wakes up for prayer, he thanks Allah for waking him up. If he avoids temptation, he thanks Allah for protecting him. If he speaks words that benefit others, he thanks Allah for placing those words on his tongue. The focus shifts away from the self and back toward the one who made every good thing possible. This way of thinking protects the heart from arrogance and keeps humility alive. The believer remembers that the blessings he enjoys today could disappear tomorrow if Allah willed it. Strength can become weakness, wealth can become poverty, health can become illness. Remembering this does not create fear, it creates gratitude. Perhaps this is why some of the most righteous people in history were also the most humble. The closer they grew to Allah, the less impressed they became with themselves. The more they learned, the more they recognized how much they still needed their Lord. Their confidence came not from believing in their own abilities, but from trusting in Allah's mercy. The world often tells people to believe in themselves. Faith teaches something deeper. Work hard, use the abilities Allah gave you, and strive for excellence. But never forget where those abilities came from. The believer does not deny his efforts, but neither does he worship them. He understands that his efforts are only seeds, while Allah alone is the one who allows those seeds to grow. This realization changes the way a person faces failure as well. When plans collapse, he does not collapse with them. When doors close, He does not believe his future has ended. He knows that the one who closed one door can open another in ways he never imagined. His hope survives because his hope was never tied only to circumstances. Maybe true strength begins here. Not in pretending that we need nobody, but in recognizing how much we need Allah. Not in carrying every burden ourselves, but in learning where to place those burdens. The strongest heart is not the one that depends on itself the most. The strongest heart is the one that knows exactly where to turn when its own strength reaches its limits.
Not everyone depends on Allah in the same way. Some people turn to Him only when life becomes difficult, while others carry that sense of dependence with them every single day of their lives. Ibn Qayyim explains that people stand at different levels in their relationship with their Creator, and the deeper a person understands his need for Allah, the more peaceful and stable his heart becomes. The first level belongs to those who remember Allah mainly during hardship. When fear enters their lives, they pray with sincerity. When illness comes, they seek His mercy. When all other doors seem closed, they finally knock on the door that has never been closed. Many people discover their relationship with Allah during moments of pain. Hardship often awakens a person to realities that comfort can hide. But there is a higher level than this. There are people who remember Allah not only in difficulty, but also in moments of ease. They understand that their need for Him does not disappear when life is going well. They know that health is a gift, wealth is a gift, and every peaceful day is a gift. Instead of remembering Allah only when blessings disappear, they remember Him while blessings are still in their hands. These people begin seeing life differently. Success does not make them arrogant because they know who opened the doors for them. Failure does not destroy them because they know who controls every outcome. Their hearts remain balanced because their trust is placed in something greater than changing circumstances. Then there are those who reach an even deeper level of understanding. They realize that every good thing in their lives comes from Allah. Their ability to pray comes from Allah. Their ability to stay away from sin comes from Allah. Their patience during hardship and their gratitude during ease both come from Allah. Instead of admiring themselves, they become more thankful. Instead of becoming proud, they become more humble. This understanding changes the way they see other people as well. They stop looking down on those who struggle because they know how easily they themselves could have struggled under different circumstances. They stop feeling superior because they know that everything they possess could disappear in a moment if Allah willed it. Mercy begins replacing judgment, and compassion begins replacing pride. Perhaps one of the greatest dangers for the human heart is believing that it achieved everything on its own. The world constantly encourages people to celebrate themselves, trust themselves, and depend entirely on themselves. But faith teaches a different lesson. Work hard, use your abilities, and strive for excellence, but never forget who gave you those abilities in the first place. The believer learns to see himself honestly. He recognizes his weaknesses without falling into despair. He recognizes his strengths without becoming arrogant. He understands that both his strengths and his weaknesses
are opportunities to grow closer to Allah. Success teaches gratitude, while hardship teaches patience. Both become part of the same journey. The deeper this understanding grows, the lighter the heart becomes. A person no longer feels responsible for controlling every detail of life. He still plans, works, and takes action, but he no longer carries the crushing burden of believing that everything depends entirely on him. He leaves room for trust, room for faith, and room for Allah's wisdom to unfold in ways he may not yet understand. Perhaps this is why some of the calmest people are not those with the easiest lives, but those with the deepest trust in Allah. Their peace does not come from perfect circumstances. It comes from knowing that whatever happens, they are never outside the care and wisdom of their Lord. The strongest heart is not the one that believes it can stand alone. The strongest heart is the one that knows exactly where to turn when life becomes heavy. And the closer a person comes to that understanding, the closer he comes to the kind of peace that neither success can create nor hardship can take away.
The way a person sees life begins to change when he truly understands how much he needs Allah. Many of the fears that control people come from the belief that everything depends on them. They believe they must hold every part of life together with their own strength. They worry about every possibility, every future problem, and every door that may close. Slowly, the weight becomes too heavy for the heart to carry. Ibn Qayyim reminds us that one of the greatest sources of peace is understanding that we were never meant to carry the world on our shoulders. We were created to work, to strive, and to make wise choices, but we were never created to control every outcome. There is a difference between responsibility and control, and many people spend their entire lives confusing the two. The believer still plans for the future, but he understands that the future belongs to Allah. He still works hard, but he knows that success is not created by effort alone. He still takes every step he can, but he leaves room in his heart for Allah's wisdom to guide the result wherever it needs to go. This balance protects the heart from both arrogance and despair. One of the reasons people become overwhelmed is because they feel personally responsible for things they cannot control. They carry tomorrow's problems before tomorrow arrives. They replay yesterday's mistakes long after yesterday has passed. They fight battles in their minds that may never happen at all. The heart becomes exhausted because it was never designed to live in the future or remain trapped in the past. Trust in Allah brings the heart back to the present moment. It reminds the believer that his responsibility is today's effort, while tomorrow belongs to his Lord. This does not remove concern completely, but it stops concern from becoming fear, and stops fear from becoming hopelessness. Ibn Qayyim teaches that true trust is not passive waiting. It is not sitting still and expecting life to solve itself. The believer ties his camel and then trusts Allah. He studies and then trusts Allah. He works and then trusts Allah. He seeks treatment and then trusts Allah. Action and trust were never meant to compete with each other. They were meant to walk side by side. The world often teaches people to trust only what they can see. Trust your savings, trust your plans, trust your abilities. Yet life repeatedly reminds us how fragile these things can be. Wealth disappears, opportunities change, health can vanish unexpectedly. The servant who builds his entire sense of security on temporary things will always live with fear, because temporary things can always be lost. But the believer builds his security upon something that cannot disappear. Allah does not weaken. Allah does not change. Allah does not abandon His servants. This is why faith gives people a kind of strength that circumstances cannot easily shake. Perhaps this is why some people remain calm during storms that would break others apart. Their peace does not come from having easy lives. Their peace comes from knowing who controls their lives. They understand that every delay has wisdom, every hardship has purpose, and every closed door hides a lesson or a better opening somewhere ahead. The heart becomes lighter when it stops trying to act like God and remembers that it is a servant. The believer was never asked to carry the universe. He was only asked to walk faithfully through the path placed before him and trust the one who sees the entire road from beginning to end. Maybe this is one of the greatest freedoms a human being can experience. To work without becoming consumed by outcomes. To hope without becoming imprisoned by expectations. To strive without becoming crushed by fear. And to sleep at night knowing that while you rest, the one who watches over the heavens and the earth never sleeps and never forgets you.
Every journey eventually leads to one final question. Who truly carries the weight of your life? Many people spend years believing that everything depends on them. They feel responsible for every success, every failure, every opportunity, and every outcome. They carry worries about tomorrow, regrets about yesterday, and fears about things that may never even happen. Little by little, the heart becomes tired because it was never created to carry so much. Ibn Qayyim brings us back to one of the simplest and most beautiful truths a believer can know. Allah is the Lord, and we are His servants. He controls what we cannot control. He sees what we cannot see. He knows what we do not know. The more deeply a person understands this, the lighter life begins to feel. Human beings often confuse effort with control. We believe that if we work hard enough, plan carefully enough, and worry enough, we can guarantee the future we want. Yet life teaches us again and again that many of the most important moments were never in our hands to begin with. We did not choose where we would be born. We did not choose the family we would grow up in. We did not choose many of the opportunities that shaped our lives. And one day, we will not choose the moment we leave this world either. Recognizing this truth does not make a believer weak. It makes him free. He still works hard. He still plans wisely. He still gives his best effort in everything he does. But he no longer carries the impossible burden of believing that the entire world rests on his shoulders. He understands where his responsibility ends and where trust in Allah begins. This understanding changes the way a person experiences both success and failure. Success becomes a reason for gratitude rather than pride. Failure becomes a lesson rather than a disaster. Closed doors become opportunities to trust Allah's wisdom
instead of reasons to lose hope. The believer begins seeing life through a different lens. Perhaps this is one of the greatest gifts faith can give a person. The world teaches us that peace comes from having control over everything around us. Faith teaches us that peace comes from knowing who is already in control. The world says that security comes from money, power, and certainty. Faith reminds us that true security comes from Allah alone. Ibn Qayyim teaches that real surrender is not giving up effort. It is giving up the illusion that everything depends on us. It is working with all of our strength while remembering that the final outcome belongs to Allah. It is planting the seed while trusting Allah to bring the rain. This kind of trust changes the heart. Anxiety begins losing its grip because the believer knows that his future is in safe hands. Fear becomes smaller because he knows that nothing can happen outside the knowledge and wisdom of his Lord. Even hardship becomes easier to carry because he no longer carries it alone. Perhaps this is why some of the strongest believers were not those with the easiest lives, but those with the deepest trust in Allah. Their peace did not come from perfect circumstances. Their peace came from knowing the one who controls every circumstance. Storms still came, losses still happened, and difficulties still arrived. But their hearts remained steady because their hearts were anchored somewhere higher than the world. At the end of this journey, Ibn Qayyim leaves us with a question that every believer must answer for himself. Will we continue trying to carry life alone, or will we finally place our trust in the one who has been carrying us since the day we were born? Maybe true peace begins at the moment we stop asking ourselves how we will carry tomorrow and start remembering who has carried us through every yesterday. And perhaps that is the secret that lies behind every peaceful heart. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of trust in Allah.